Good evening, everyone. Buenos noches. Bonjour. Bon dia. Buongiorno. Ni hao. Bienvenidos. Dobre utro. Namaste. Sawadi. Chawim. Mangandan kapun. Pomoye. Sopa wanang sung. Assalamu alaikum. Privet. Guten Tag. Kalimara. And as they say in Hebrew, Shalom. I start off with some of those different languages to greet some of you who are from various backgrounds, who are also part of this discussion and listening tonight to this awesome, incredible, insightful discussion this evening. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be part of this extraordinary event this evening. Thank you for joining this incredible panel and awesome discussion, Being Human by Judith Heumann. In the 1970s, Judith Heumann once said, "Change never happens at the pace we think it should. It happens over years of people joining together, strategizing, sharing, and pulling all the levers they possibly can. Gradually, excruciatingly, slowly, things start to happen. And then suddenly and seemingly out of the blue, something will tip." And tonight, we will go deep into some of the conversations that Judith talked about in her extraordinary book, Being Human by Judith Heumann. Before we begin the panel discussion and also the brief summary, brief history of disableism and neurodiversity by Costello Copeland, we will have a few words by Mr. William DeMayo. Mr. William DeMayo is the president of the ADA Coalition of Connecticut and also superintendent of Newington Parks and Recreation. And one thing about Mr. DeMayo, he always has a positive attitude. And he has been a disability activist for years. And he's here tonight to share a few words with all of you. Mr. DeMayo, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Booker, for inviting me. I only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go quick. A little bit about me, Parks and Rec. I'm a Parks and Recreation Director, Superintendent in Newington. Started for 40 years. I'm 64 years old. Started in Rocky Hill, went to Newington, went to New Britain for 31, and back to Newington in 8. I'm blind and have a guide dog from Fidelco, and I gave up my driver's license at 30 years old, so I know what it's like to be able-bodied and disabled at the same time. I believe that tonight we're going to listen to some great panelists and discuss topics of this Being Human book that will make us better people. I believe that the power of advocacy, helping others, helping to break down walls and help with freedom and independence for people with disabilities is so very, very important. And that's why we're here tonight. Second point I wanted to bring up is that if you're listening and you're participating, you may have been asked to come, you may have stumbled upon it, you may have been made to come to watch this. But I'm telling you that I believe strongly that you're here for a reason and you're here for a purpose. And I think when you leave after listening to these speakers in topics of the book that we talk about, you are going to leave as a different person, a much better person, a positive person. And it's going to be exciting. So how do we get going? How do we change the world, right? Can we change the world in small steps? Yes, I think we can. And how do we do it? We keep our minds and our hearts wide open. And that's what we need to do tonight, to listen to and be influenced to be good and to be positive people. When I talk about people with disabilities and advocating for them, I say, how can we talk to people with disabilities and be comfortable? And I say one thing, ask one question. Is there anything I can do to help you? And that person, the person with the disability will say, yes, sure. Can you help me find the door? Or no, thank you, I'm all set. But what happens is you break down the barriers and you start to talk and communicate as able-bodied people together with equality. See, once we start that question and we start the conversation and communication, we then start to break down inequalities and discrimination. Discrimination happens every day to a person with a disability. And I could talk hours on that, but we're not going to. But it's important to break down those kinds of those barriers. Now, if we can do that, what should we do? How can we get to be influence people for the positivity, for dealing with advocacy and becoming better advocates. You and I can talk to our friends, our family, our coworkers, and even strangers, but we can use our hearts and our brains, melt them together, and use respect, love, passion, kindness, helpfulness. And we can do this and become better advocates, because that's what the world needs. So if we're going to change the world one step at a time, these are the things we need to do and be conscious of. Once we learn from the speakers tonight, we become better people. We influence others so that discrimination is minimized or eliminated. We give people jobs with all things equal, give them jobs. Don't let them be chastised or special or put aside. Let them be part of the group. Give them freedom and independence. If we all do that tonight, when we leave as better people, as advocates for people with disability, guess what happens? We change the world and we make it a better place to live, work, and play. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeMeo. Really appreciate you coming this evening. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to an extraordinary discussion based off of the history behind disableism and neurodiversity. Costella Copeland-Smith. Costella Copeland-Smith is a social justice educator and currently the graduate program coordinator for the Psychological Sciences Department under the class of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Connecticut. She was previously an associate instructor at the Craig Academy of International Studies Elementary School in South Windsor, Connecticut. Mrs. Costella Copeland-Smith was also previously a distance learning elementary classroom teacher at International Magnet School for Global Citizenship. She is currently a fourth-year doctoral student at Liberty University online program with a concentration in educational leadership. She graduated from UConn in 2017 with her bachelor's degree in 2019 with her master's degree. Her interests include contributing to the theory of intersectionality through a creative problem-based learning perspective through interactive curricula. She also facilitates advocacy through the spoken word on the intersections of multiracial and queer experiences through online and in-person events as the vice chair of the Windsor Human Relations Commission. Costella has also been assisting with the facilitation and creation of events and podcasts for the National Black Cooperative through engaging dialogues around current social injustices. She has been a peer mentor for marginalized youth for over 10 years and enjoys finding new ways to connect with people of all ages. In her free time, you can find her figure skating, making paper crayons, reading, or enjoying time with her family. Most recently, she became a national figure skating champion on the adult figure skating track. Let's welcome Mrs. Costella Copeland-Smith.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So as Kevin said, my name is Costella. You can also call me Cassie. I'm going to share my presentation with you all in the chat. I'm going to give you a brief history. Now, when I say brief, I condensed like a couple thousand years worth of history. So I'm going to be moving a little quickly, but I want to make sure it's accessible to everyone. And there are links that you can click on to continue to educate yourself, share it with your communities and your peers. All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you all and get started. Okay. So before our lovely panelists get going, I'm just going to give you what's called a common ground. And in this common ground, there is knowledge that we can all learn from. I know there's some people who might have more knowledge on disableism and neurodiversity, and there might be people who don't have any knowledge. And that's okay, because we're all here to learn, okay? The first thing I want to focus on before we even talk and dive into this discussion is the wheel of power and privilege. Now, we might have heard some of these thrown around with like quote unquote identity politics. And we focus here on a lot of different identities at different discussions. So today we are going to be focusing primarily on ability, which you can see right here. And we're going to talk about the various intersections within it. And there are many terms here within identity, and sometimes things might kind of seem similar. So we're going to kind of really tease things out. And I just say this to say that even though we're focusing on ability, there are other identities that will impact people's experiences, such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc. So I feel like I really need to highlight that. So I like to see this like a cake. You know, it's all sweet and lovely. But do you think about the ingredients of a cake? There's the butter, the baking soda, the salt, but all these ingredients come together to make each of us our own unique dessert. So I use this metaphor to show that we are not just one identity. We are a beautiful mix, or our own little cake mix here, of all of these different identities. So even though we're focusing on one, I just want to remind us of these many different intersections. I also want to highlight that historically, people who were fat or had a larger body size and people who were Black and brown were considered automatically people with a disability for that identity. And I'm here to say that those are different identities. There is an intersection, but that is not having a skin color is not the same as having an ability. Again, there is an intersection, meaning I can have an ability and a race and a gender, but that is not the same thing. And historically, these groups of people have been lumped together. So I just want to highlight and recognize that here. And if you would like to see and read more about race and body size and what that has to do with disability, feel free to check out some of the links that I have here. I do want to give a quick content warning. Some of the history can get a bit violent when we talk about eugenics and other sciences that happened in the past, specifically around white supremacist thoughts. So I do want to give that content warning before we jump in. So real quick, there are some terms here. Some of you may have heard of them about, some people in the educational realm that I'm in say, oh, well, that's for the people with special needs. We have now retired that term and use a term called neurodiversity. And it encompasses a lot of different abilities, whether it is physical, mental, emotional, or psychological, or learning. So neurodiversity is the idea that neurological differences, neurological meaning the brain, like autism and ADHD, are the result of normal natural variants in the human genome. Because in school, we are taught that, if you're different, you're quote unquote special. Again, we retire those terms, and now we have what's called neurodivergent. This is where maybe someone's brain just thinks a little differently. That doesn't mean that they themselves are a bad person in any regard. We just say neurodivergent. And we have neurotypical, those who are not classified as neurodivergent or quote unquote typical. And this is all an umbrella term under neurodiversity. Now, I just want to highlight real quick that this is the terms that we have for now. Things are constantly changing, just like within the LGBTQ community and the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color. That's a more recent term. Things change all the time. So this is what we got for now. Like some people might refer to themselves as physically differently abled or emotionally differently abled, or they prefer to refer themselves as a disabled person. So if you're not sure, just ask, say, hey, how would you like to refer? Or if you feel comfortable and safe in that setting to do so. Again, continuing real quick, we have ability, ableism, disability, and disableism. I do want to point out real quick that ableism is a more of an American term that is used here to describe the systematic discrimination, oppression, and prejudice towards people labeled as disabled. The rest of the world uses the term disableism as, and this is, as I quote, discrimination on the grounds on disability. So it's really putting the people first instead of saying, oh, it's the ability or this, or that this condition that I have that is the problem. It's like, no, it is society that is making it a problem. So again, just briefly overviewing some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can check out some of these links to learn some more. And these are some upcoming terms here. We have mentalism, sanism, and autism that really capture the different types of prejudice and discrimination and forms of oppression that people may face across their different types of ability or disability. And I also have some resources and pictures you'll see throughout the presentation to learn about how this all connects to other points of our identity. So there's eco-ableism and the climate movement, and talking about more of that intersection. So you'll see that sprinkled throughout. So as I mentioned briefly before, but now this is the in-depth list. These are just a couple or a few examples of disabilities. This is not all encompassing. I don't know every single different type out there. This is just to give you an example. We have psychiatric or mental, learning, and physical. Again, this is my interpretation and understanding based off of the literature or knowledge that is out there currently. So this can be classified in different ways. Some of the subtypes of psychiatric or mental include mental illness or quote unquote disorders, and that's conditions that affect the behavior. Mental health, which is more about the moment or feeling of anxiety, depression. Sometimes it can manifest as physical. So again, there's intersectionality within these different types and examples. We have a learning disability, which can be cognitive or intellectual. It can be speech motivated, auditory, and sometimes speech and auditory, especially within education as a former teacher, sometimes they're lumped together. So again, I know in our conversation later with the panelists, we'll be talking more about some of these experiences as well. And finally, we have physical, which it can include mobility, medical, or environmental. All right, so this is just a very brief overview. You can click on each of these later on if you want to do some more reading. This is, again, not all expansive, but just to give you an idea of the vast, like there's so many different types of disabilities. So when we say one, there's not one quote unquote correct way or way to be as a person with a disability. And we have the social and medical model of disability. I slightly hinted at this earlier, where the medical model, which is what a lot of organizations use, basically says, oh, you're the problem. It's because you have something here that's not like the rest of us, so you are the problem. But the social model of disability says, you know what? No, I'm not the problem. There are a lot of barriers, like in the environment around me, the attitudes and stereotypes and discrimination, and the organizations that aren't actually accommodating. No, it is society. So we call that the social model. So I just want to highlight these models because you're going to see how through history we have progressed from a medical model, and we're still working on moving more towards a social model. All right, here we go. So here is our history. I have a condensed historical timeline here of the disability movement. Again, I'm not including everything. I'm just doing a brief overview. So we are starting in ancient times. This is like BC or ancient times, like and has influenced policy. All right, this is from ideas from early Greece, early North Africa, and Egypt. And then we're going to get into the medieval and Renaissance times from the 1300s through the 1500s. Then we're going to get into the more contemporary colonialism and early governance in America, in the USA here. And then we're going to get into the 1800s, social enlightenment and early science era. A lot of the policies that we have nowadays, like you can start to see like some of the historical roots, especially in the 1800s. Finally, we're going to move into the 1900s, which if you have seen the Netflix documentary Crip Camp, then you will get a little sneak peek as well into that. And then finally, up to modern day in the 2000s. I know we're in 2022, but man, a lot of things have happened over the years. All right, so feel free to click on the links in your own time to do some more learning. And let's get started. So first we have the ancient times. And during these times, disabilities was not really seen as important or interesting. Children during that time and people who had disabilities were seen as, quote, objects of scorn, and were often like physically abused and treated very poorly during that time. The silver linings, or some of the positivity from this time, included architecture. So some of the architecture was mobility impaired friendly, meaning that for anyone whom a ramp was easier than a stairs. A lot of that, you can go all the way back to ancient times, and they had ramps. You can tell from that architectural time. And there are some common terms that you might see. You might recognize a few. And these are derogatory terms that we may still hear today that refer to people with disabilities, such as imbecile, freak, or idiot. A lot of those very harmful linguistic terms come from ancient times, but I don't think most people know that history. Then we're getting into the Middle Ages. I have a poignant quote here, or an important one, to kind of show some of the medical innovations that people came up with to help make mobility possible. And I also want to highlight here, it says more than half the population in Metapontum had at least one such disability that was so severe as to leave a permanent mark on their skeleton, meaning most of the population were people with disability. But socially, they were like, no, like this is not cool. We can't talk about it. And yet all this like beautiful innovation and thought and all this different thing came out from it that people are now currently studying. There's an explosion of literature, of books, of studies, all about ancient times and Middle Ages that has been coming out. So you'll get to see this too, like in the 1200s and 1400s, you'll see, I have some books here talking about what it was like to live back in the day, the documentation that they have. They were seen kind of, people with disabilities were seen living and working in their communities, especially in churches, because they weren't offered other positions. A lot of the attitudes back then, this is the intersection with religious identity is, oh, well, you deserved it. You must have, quote unquote, like committed a sin or something. Again, like this is back in the day. A lot of people had very harsh attitudes and views with people with disabilities. And there were special institutions, this started in the 1200s, such as asylums and hospitals that started to appear during this time to care for people who were ill or people who had disabilities. So I know that that was a lot. We're going to start to move into the Renaissance. So during this time, a lot of people with disabilities were often the poorest citizens socioeconomically, meaning they didn't have as much resources and money, and therefore they were segregated. So much so that the Queen Elizabeth was like, you know what? I'm going to make some laws. And they called them the Elizabethan Poor Laws for the government to take more responsibility of the poor, and mainly those with disabilities. They were documented and only used for entertainment. If you see P.T. Barnum, I know Connecticut has an interesting connection to that as well. If you go down to the shoreline, they were used as entertainment, or quote unquote seen as the fool, which again, very harsh language and terminology. You can see that in Hunchback of Notre Dame, how he was treated. There's a lot of interesting video analysis of that online and from a contemporary stance. And you can also see some contemporary examples in Game of Thrones as well. They talk about a lot of different identities in the show when you use different theories to understand it better. And if you would like to learn more about the Renaissance history here, you can check it out here on the right, where there are different points here. So if you want to check out some more. Then we have a cultural history of disability in the Renaissance. So this is just a poignant quote here saying that this is where you can start to see the social model of disability, especially in this point in history. So if you want to do some more readings, this is where it's becoming a little more prominent. Then we have the 1600s. There's colonialism and the early US government. During this time, it was the town's responsibility to support those in need. So individuals with disabilities and criminals were often lumped under one roof together. And this is where you can start to see the straitjackets, shackles, and other forms of restraint known as quote unquote moral treatment with institutionalizing people with disability. So if you want to do some more reading on this era, especially with Connecticut, once again, our state had a huge role in some parts of it, and you can actually visit some of the historical institutions as well. Now we're moving into the 1800s. A lot of the schools and institutions are becoming more relevant. I'm going to highlight 1817, the first school for deaf in the United States is founded in Hartford, Connecticut, and that's here. And then from there onwards, back in the day, they used to use offensive terms, and we wouldn't say these terms nowadays, such as mental retardation. They would use that term to refer to people with disabilities. And here's a couple of other houses listed in the Boston, Massachusetts area, in addition to the Connecticut area as well. Braille was introduced 1860, and shortly after, the President Abraham Lincoln authorized college degrees for Columbia Institution for the deaf, dumb, and blind. Again, terms that they had used back in the day. This is a big point here. I'm going to just go briefly over it. There's the eugenics movement here, and this is basically forced sterilization, meaning that if you were a person with a disability and you wanted to have children, they were like, nope, you're not allowed. They put it into law. They put it into society. They were like, you do not have that right. And they actually started a crusade to go and find people who had certain genes and institutionalize them, saying, nope, you are not allowed to reproduce. There's an excellent book here from the Indiana experiment to the human genome era that they do a deep dive into this. So I highly recommend reading the book. It's incredible. And eugenics and disability discrimination continue into the 1900s. The sterilization movement is a fascinating and very raw and violent part of the United States history that involves people with disabilities, Black, Indigenous people of color, among many others. So if you'd like to find some more here, you can check it out here. And I also want to see here that Connecticut had a statute which prohibited any man who had a disability from marrying a woman under 45 years of age, the presumed limit of childbearing. I know there's a lot of genderism and things going on here. So again, if you would like to check it out, feel free to check it out. All right, briefly going into the 1900s, there's again a timeline here, which goes into more of the different laws. There are like around 200 or 300 laws around sterilization and eugenics that we don't really talk about in history. I want you to take a look real quick here. There's only 13 states here who didn't have any laws on eugenical sterilization. Yes, Connecticut, we were part of that. We were really pro for that. So again, if you want to check that out, I have the link in the notes section. In the 1900s, there's a lot of forced sterilization. As I said before, you can check out the Buck versus Bell Supreme Court. And you can see some of the silver linings again about the League of Physically Handicapped that formed in 1930s that continued to do great work into modern day. In the 50s, this is where we're starting to get into crip camp, where we have the Social Security amendments. Some of you may start to recognize some of this, whether you lived through that time or whether you had watched the Netflix series or other documentaries online. And then we're getting starting to get into present day, where we have LEAP that was founded to provide services and mentorship for individuals with disabilities. Also finding more advocacy in the Cleveland and the nation region. Commonwealth of Virginia House. If we had more time, I'd get into the whole kind of nuts and bolts about that case and how they were like, yep, it's okay to force sterilization for people, when in reality, they basically said it was constitutionally okay. And then now in 2001, they're like, oh, we're sorry, that's not cool anymore. And then now we have this up to present. So I am just going to show you a couple of things here. We have a couple of executive orders, the Section 501 updates, Section 503 updates. There's a really cool group called Recording Artists and Music Professionals with Disabilities that came out recently. And there's a couple of upcoming bills to check out.
Hello, everyone.
Let me move forward. And finally, here are some helpful resources. So continue to learn. I know that this was super brief, but I really encourage you. I made this really interactive so that way you can continue your learning, whether it's in the classroom, at home, in the community. Feel free to check out these links. And finally, here's some quotes from Judith Heumann herself. So feel free to soak in some of her words and be a little bit I don't want to say inspired, because again, that's a whole other thing, but she has had an incredible life. It's an incredible book. So thank you so much for allowing me to present and for bearing with me. And now I'd like to welcome back Kevin Booker Jr. To introduce our moderators for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Costella Copeland-Smith. Thank you so much for that brief history of disableism and neurodiversity. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Next, we will have Dr. Gladys Labus. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gladys Labus. Dr. Gladys Labus was a urban administrator, a school principal at the Meriden Public Schools, where she orchestrated the planning and management of a rigorous standards-based school improvement plan and its application of high quality teaching and learning for all students. She was also an adjunct professor at the University of Connecticut's NEAG School of Education, where she taught graduate courses in multicultural bilingual education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction for a decade. Her research interests include coaching for leadership, professional learning, diversity and equity issues, and bilingual program development and implementation, discourse analysis of bilinguals, effective leadership that promotes and sustains student achievement, quality teaching, and successful schools and districts, and effective learning environments for the ever-increasing diverse student population in the state. Dr. Labus has published articles, chapters, teacher training manuals, and guidebooks. She has presented research and training papers at state, regional, and national conferences, the American Education Research Association, the Arizona State Universities Equity Alliance, the National Association for Bilingual and Bicultural Education, the Paris International Conference on Education, the Brown University Research and Evaluation Center, and the University of Connecticut's Roundtable of Research in Bilingual Education. She is also an article reviewer for the Journal of Latinos and Education. Additionally, she has conducted state and national high school accreditations as chair and member of the State of Connecticut's Institutions of Higher Education. She also wrote the first bilingual law for Connecticut in 1977. I want to say that again for you all so you can see who's moderating this incredible event tonight. She also wrote the first bilingual law for Connecticut in 1977 and rewrote the bilingual law in 2015, which she co-chaired with Dr. Miguel Cardona, Secretary of Education. Dr. Labus has received the National Milken Leadership Award, the Connecticut Association of School, CIAC Recognition, and NEAS Recognition Award. She never forgets what her father said: never lower yourself to someone else's standards, meaning that when someone puts you down, you do not get upset and make a big show. Just stay calm and let the person know why they are wrong. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Gladys Labus.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. That was wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. I am so pleased to be here, and it's wonderful to be with you all this evening for this very, very important event. First, I want and take this opportunity to introduce our panelists. We have a wonderful group of panelists for discussion, and I want to take this time to introduce them. I want to introduce first Kyle Murray. Kyle Murray is a sophomore at Mitchell College in New London, Connecticut. Kyle has been an advocate for people with disabilities for 30 years. Currently, Kyle advocates for the rights of people with disabilities facing housing insecurity. Kyle enjoys swimming, hiking, and loving his beautiful cat, Jay. Welcome, Kyle. Our next panelist is Robin Hickley. Robin Hickley is a junior at Mitchell College. So she has volunteer experience. Her journey in disability advocacy started later in life when she developed a physical disability. that shifted her professional goals in life as well as her lifestyle. Robin loves reading, dance, and above all, anything Disney. Welcome. Our next panelist is Reverend Hollis Cotton. Welcome, Reverend Hollis Cotton is an ordained interior elder pastor in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He is an expert in disability rights, serving on the board of the Disability Law Center of Massachusetts, Partners for Youth with Disabilities, and the Renaissance Charter School. He is also a proud member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist, Olivia Bump. Olivia Bump transferred to Mitchell College in the fall of 2022. Olivia has been completely blind since birth and has been an advocate for the blind since her first year of high school. Olivia is also passionate about women's issue and gender equity. In her spare time, Olivia enjoys reading, writing, and baking. Oh, welcome. And now we have Tommy Simmons. And it's either Tommy or Thomas. You let me know. But Tommy Simmons is a junior at Mitchell College, where he studies psychology with a minor in gender and sexuality studies. His freshman year on September 10th, 2020, he founded the Mitchell College Mental Health Awareness Club. Tommy has also served as a student, excuse me, representative of Mitchell College Mental Health Coalition, an orientation leader and a transitional mentor. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone. So, our panelists, we will start with our first question, and please be concise, and we have 2 minutes for each panelist to respond. And the question that we have is, I would like to hear from each of you. What is something that people do not realize that you have to deal with when you are navigating your daily life? What challenges do you face, and how do you overcome these challenges? Why don't we start first with Kyle?
Thank you, Dr. Lavis. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you all for being here. I think that one thing that people don't realize that I have to navigate, I have bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think people don't realize that it's difficult for me to take a lot of projects on at a time. People will invite me to be part of certain things. And for instance, school. School is very important for me. And sometimes I get asked to serve on certain committees and do certain things. And it's hard for me to say no, but I need to say no for my mental health. And so that's something that I've begun to practice, is how to say no without feeling guilty.
Thank you. Robin?
Thank you. Thank you for everyone being here. I think one thing people don't know that I have to navigate is that even though I look physically able, I can walk everything, walking for me can be excruciating. When people see me get out of my car in a handicapped spot, they don't always understand that, and they don't always see that it can be physically exhausting to do simple everyday things, even if I push myself. And sometimes I think I have to learn to limit myself when I am feeling a certain way. So
thank you. Reverend Hollis?
I like Robin, have pretty much the same situation in terms of the need to limit my physical activity, and that requires me to be very focused in terms of whatever my primary mission is for the day. Because if I stack too many things on, I become physically exhausted, and that situation, without giving away my age, it has become more acute as time has moved forward. I've had cerebral palsy since birth, but I no longer have the strength of some of our Mitchell College students, and so I have to be careful with my physicality nowadays. But I'm glad to be here nonetheless, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Olivia?
One of the things I think people don't realize about me is how proud I am of the fact that I am not a statistic, because 70% of blind people in the United States are unemployed, and only, I think it's, and somebody can tell me if I have the number wrong accidentally, 15% of us 15% of us graduate from high school, and I always wake up with a positive attitude and don't let my blindness stop me. If some people say, oh wow, it might be terrifying to be blind, but it's just a reality for me, and I just have dealt with the cards that life has given me.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for those words. Tommy?
Like Robin, my disability is also invisible. I've had 12 spinal surgeries, and also like Robin, I do park in a handicapped parking spot. And there are times that I've parked at the Stop and Shop, and like people have given me like just like, you know, strange eyes because they don't think I belong there. But like what they don't realize is disabilities can be invisible, and not to judge people.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. Thank you. Our next question is, we know there are different types of support and policies that help and protect people with disabilities. But what are we missing? What policies, law, or practices could be implemented that would make spaces more inclusive and welcoming to people with disability? Why don't we start this time with Tommy?
I think that rather than creating separate spaces for people who are disabled for a like accessible area, like integrating the people with just able-bodied people, just so they have a more like sense of like normalcy, because that's all somebody who's disabled wants, a sense of normalcy.
Again, think about the laws that we have and think about it. Are there enough? Is that enough what we're doing? Think of it also when you're answering the question. But thank you, Tommy. If you want to add, that's okay. We could come back. About Olivia.
I don't know how this ties into everything, but I think that the APA needs to do a better job of making psychological evaluations meaningful for blind and visually impaired children who have additional needs, because right now a lot of the tests out there are visual, and there's not really a lot of training. And you have to go, and sometimes it can take months and months and months and months and months to be able to get an assessment and to be seen by a therapist.
Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Hollis?
Well, I personally, at this point, I really don't think that I do think that new laws need to be created and legislated. But I think what's more important is that the laws which are on the books are strictly and rightfully enforced. And very rarely do we have a situation where a law assists with cultural changes. Those who are familiar with Brown versus Board of Education can remember the phrase "with all deliberate speed." In the case of the ADA, it's been more than 30 years, and there are still a lot of situations which are not accessible. I, being clergy, because the ADA did not deal with houses of worship, still have to deal with architectural barriers in churches, even ones that I have been pastors of. So I think the question is a good question, but right now I think that there are several laws that are on the books, such as 504, which Judith Heumann fought for, and we saw it in the movie Crip Camp, which, if those laws were fully implemented and the spirit of the law was brought into the culture itself, then we wouldn't necessarily have the need to speak about future laws.
Thank you. Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Robin?
So I'm kind of piggybacking off of what Mr. Collins said, as well as what Tommy said I think the laws that are in place are good and they have been written to do what they do. But I feel like in certain situations, at least in my life, I've seen them not be enforced, because I have seen me and my partner both have physical disabilities, and I have seen him get rejected from 20 plus jobs because he has visual impairments as well as paralysis. And I have also been questioned on, oh, well, if you can't drive yourself to work, why should we give you the job? And it's just, there are laws in place to protect him, but these companies act like they're not aware of them. So I think spreading awareness and making sure that they are being enforced is what really does matter at this point.
Thank you. Kyle?
I think that with the ADA and how some of the buildings have been grandfathered in has been a barrier because they're institutions of higher learning where people have disabilities and they can't, people have barriers getting up the stairs, or apartment buildings or things like that. I think they need to look at that. Perhaps that's a little bit too much of a loophole. That makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Thank you. Our next question is, describe a time when you experienced discrimination based on your disability. How did you react and how did it affect you? I'd like to start with Robin.
Thank you. So in my experience, because my disability is so invisible, I had a really hard time last year with campus parking and being told, oh, well, you don't have the handicap sticker. And I kept telling them, well, I'm working on it, but they need proof from a doctor, and the doctor won't give me proof because, oh, well, you can walk, but walking from class to class can be excruciating. And it was really kind of defeating to feel like no one was really in my corner when I needed all these accommodations and I needed to be able to do these things in my everyday life. I was lucky when I finally got it this year, but I remember it being a constant struggle of trying to battle parking tickets because they would give me tickets because I was parking on lower campus or parking where I wasn't supposed to park just to make my life easier.
Thank you. How about Olivia?
I remember in 10th grade, it was the first quarter of the first part of the school year, and I was taking an English class. The teacher didn't provide me the bell ringers / entrance tickets, as you will, to complete in order to receive participation or attendance, if you will. I had done well on the other assignments, but I remember on my interim, I had received a C because I didn't have access to those assignments, and I had a dentist appointment that day, and my dad went and talked to him. Also, for 2 years, I had to fight from 9th until 11th grade. My family and I fought for just the placement of Braille labels throughout the school, and the principal of our school was it seemed at the time was really putting up some resistance to it.
Also, tell us how it made you feel. I mean, how this affected you in the future too, because I know I was discriminated against and I still remember it, and it still bothers me. So think about that when you're answering. How about Reverend Hollis?
I believe the initial question was, think of a time when I've been discriminated against.
How did you react, and how has it affected you? Yes.
Oh, well, how much time do I have to answer? I'll stay within the 2-minute frame.
Yes.
But let me just say that I mentioned earlier that I was the first Black physically differently abled person in the history of the University of Massachusetts. I also have dyslexia. And those who went to school in the 70s or 80s can recall that computers were not part of the normal culture as they are now. We didn't have cell phones. So I had a manual typewriter to type a paper. And the paper was, the professor stood up and he said, what we're going to do is we're going to have papers. This was freshman English. We're going to have papers, and we're going to ask the question whether or not God exists. And so I dutifully handed over my paper from the Office of Disability Services, stating that I had the dyslexia and the cerebral palsy. He said it wasn't any problem, just do the class and do it well. And so I left the class. I was encouraged, wrote the paper, typed the paper, handed it in at the next class period. And the theory was that each individual was going to have their name blotted out. My name was not blotted out. It was freshman English. And the idea was that each student had an opportunity to critique the paper. Because of my problems with motor control in my hands, I had problems typing. And so they went and they gave all the criticism. And the professor said, not only are all the criticisms correct, but Hollis is stupid, silly, and illiterate and doesn't belong in college. It turned out later that we found out the reason why there weren't any other BIPOC students in that class was because many students realized that this individual was from the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and this was his way of dealing with race relations as an adjunct professor. And so how that affected me was I began to realize how important it was that I graduate. And I began to try to put support systems in place and realize that this was not just about my own college education, but about many who would have opportunities to attend the university after me.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Kyle?
Several years ago, I was having racing heart, and I ended up going to the hospital, and the doctor was great in the beginning. And he said, you have AFib and you're going to need to go on blood thinners. And he said, it's going to be a couple of days before I can get you on the blood thinners. So if this happens in the next couple of days, I want you to come back. So a day and a half later, same thing happened. I came back to the hospital, totally different doctor. She saw that I had a history of bipolar disorder and anxiety. She said, oh, I think this is anxiety. And I said, well, I was just at the hospital 2 days ago and they said I have AFib. So she put me in the hospital. She really wouldn't listen to me. She kept saying the same thing, that I had anxiety, and I felt so vulnerable and I felt so helpless at one point. But then I had my case manager in my corner and she said, I think you need to ask for a second opinion. And so I asked for a second opinion. At first, the nurse said, no, we don't really do that inpatient. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you that I'm refusing to see this doctor. So they brought in a whole new group and they said, yes, you do have AFib. Yes, you have to be on blood thinners the rest of your life. One really good thing happened. The hospital came to me and asked if I would come and speak about stigma to the hospital. And so I did that for 3 years. So something really good came out of it.
Thank you. Tommy?
A time that I faced discrimination for my disability probably would be in 10th grade. I was having a chain of like 5 surgeries within the span of a few months, and one of my surgeries was like an emergency surgery. And after we got to the hospital, I had to have a catheter bag in, and the nurse who was there like taking care of me didn't want to empty my catheter bag due to the fact that like I was having surgery in a few hours. And it kind of like made me feel like it was the first time during like all of my trials of this, 12 surgeries that like I like was depressed about it, because it's like, wow, it's like this woman who's supposed to help me is like doing quite the opposite.
Thank you. The next question, I'm going to have 3 panelists answer, and then I'm going to have the different 3 panelists answer the last question. So this is one of the questions is, what do you wish people better understood about disabilities? So I'm going to pick 3 people to answer that. And I'm going to have Olivia, Tommy, and Robin answer. How about begin with Robin?
So I think that a lot of people see disabilities as limitations. And yes, it can be limiting, but it doesn't stop us from doing everything everyone else does. Sorry about that. My older sister, who is also disabled, is a mother, and she is a wonderful mother. And no one expected her to be a great mother. And I am doing everything in life that I was told I probably wouldn't. So I think that even though, yes, it can be limiting and have limiting effects, it doesn't stop us from doing incredible things.
Correct. How about Olivia? What would you wish people better understood about disabilities?
I wish people better understood the fact that sometimes when you have one disability, there may be other disabilities that go along with that. And so I think that in areas of treatment especially, I think we need to take a more holistic approach and examine understand the people we are working that we're working with more on a case-by-case basis, because somebody may not just be blind, somebody may be blind and have autism or ADHD or an intellectual disability. And I just think that people need to understand that disability is diverse, but also I think that people need to understand that disability isn't something to fear, and we just want to be a part of society. And there should be a place for us as well.
Okay, thank you. Tommy?
Something I wish people better understood about disabilities is like people who are disabled work 10 times harder than able-bodied people. Being disabled is very expensive, and whether somebody is on disability or not everybody who's disabled qualifies for disability. And just being able to afford your daily basic necessities is very difficult. So people who are disabled do work 10 times harder just to be able to have their basic needs met.
Thank you. Our last question, and this is for Reverend Hollis and Kyle, is who along your life journey has supported you when you needed it most? And what advice can you give to others who want to be more supportive and empathetic?
I'll go ahead and just say that, like Judith Heumann, I was fortunate to have a mother who was a tremendous advocate. She made sure that I was fully and rightfully educated. And not only that, but she advocated for every aspect of my life, from preschool on up to and through graduate school. And so without her, I would not be where I am today professionally concerning my secular life. The second part of the question was what, please, again?
Yeah. What advice can you give others who want to be more supportive and empathetic?
Part of empathy is authenticity of help. And what I mean by that is that sometimes there are people who believe that they are being helpful when they have not asked the person what the person needs or how they can appropriately assist. What used to happen to me often is if I fell, people would instinctively pick me up, but in the process of picking me up, cause more harm to my body. And so that's an example of because you did not ask the individual. And another way that folks can be more empathetic is when we talk about you may be familiar, or folks may be familiar, may not be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When it talks about self-actualization, how can I assist this person, regardless of them being differently abled, to reach their highest goal? And I think that if a person begins with that authenticity, then we can really be authentic, and everyone will be helped.
Thank you. Thank you. Kyle?
My friend Lisa Rogers. I was institutionalized for 6 years in a state hospital, and people didn't think I was going to get any better. And she was a chaplain there, and she never gave up on me. And we're still friends 34 years later. And echoing what Mr. Cotton said, you know, just the simple words of, how can I be supportive to you? You know, what ways can I be supportive to you?
Well, thank you all for your insightful contribution and to our discussion this evening. I truly appreciate it. I've learned so much just listening to all of you. Thank you so much. We are now going to open up the discussion for the audience to ask questions. I would like to welcome Principal Lindsay Thompson from Environmental Science Magnet School at Mary Hooker, who will lead the question and answer. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lavas. And wow, thank you so much to all the panelists for sharing your experiences. Very impressive and just very inspiring to hear your stories this evening. And so we're going to start it off with some question and answers. And so if any of the audience members would like to submit a question, you can simply click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and just click on Ask a Question and submit your questions for the panelists to answer. And if you'd specifically like to ask any of the panelists, you can mention their name in your question. And we have a question to start it off this evening, and anyone can answer if they'd like. What advice do you have for educators and teachers to better meet the needs of their students who have a disability? And whoever would like to go first can go ahead.
I can, if that's all right.
Thank you, Robin.
Of course. I know, as with educators, there have been a history of them telling us we can't. And I think that that's one thing that should not continue, is if you have a student with a disability, talk to them, get to know their limitations, what they need help with, push them to be the best that they can be, because as Tommy said earlier, we do work 10 times harder to prove that we can. So I think just believing in them and supporting them in everything they do is a great place to start.
Thank you, Robin. Olivia?
I would say, does it have to be just, does it just have to be general disability, or can it just be one like disability specific?
It can be disability specific, that's fine.
So one of the things I would say is, as a blind student, I think that especially people, especially educators who are going to be going into general education, a lot of colleges and universities oftentimes will have in their intro to ed courses, at least this is what I've experienced and this is what I know, they only have one chapter on dealing with what they refer to as children with exceptional needs. I think that educators, especially if you have a student who is completely blind or visually impaired in your classroom, I think you should do research outside of classroom. Just go beyond the minimum, and also classroom accessibility. If you have any posters, are they described? If you have an assignment, work with the TBI to get it in early, and just include the student, because a lot of the time, especially with children who are blind, a lot of that incidental learning that takes place outside of academics. There are a lot of barriers to it.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists like to add anything? Any advice you would have for educators? It could be specific to your experiences or in general. Tommy?
I think like communication and really listening to your students, because you might have more than one students who have the same or similar disabilities, but how like a structure might work for one student might not work the same for another student, and you really have to kind of fine-tune your lesson individually per each student to make sure that they get the best out of your lesson that they can for their education.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what are some things that would support either in the workplace or in the college experience that would make a place more inclusive or accessible for yourself or for others that you know that may have a disability that impacts the way they access things at school or in the workplace?
It's simple for me, and my pet peeve is that a lot of the public workplaces that I've been involved in have chairs with wheels. And so I wind up sliding all around the floor and not being able to be at my station, so to speak, anytime that I'm working in public. And I think, if you're dealing in terms of the workplace, I think one of the things that would be helpful is if someone gets hired to consult that employee about their needs before the initial start date, as opposed to just trying to put a Band-Aid on a major problem when that individual arrives. And that's happened to me in different workplaces multiple times. I'll get there, I'll make a complaint. 2 weeks later, the complaint will be addressed with the exact different or wrong thing besides the thing that I requested. And then I have to go through an entire 3-month process to get things right. And that's, in a lot of cases concerning government work, that's half of a person's probationary period. And so then it's on record that I'm complaining about my work environment, when all that I'm really trying to do is create a situation where my best work can show forth because of the universal design of the office. So that's my pet peeve, is that right there.
Thank you. Kyle, go ahead.
I think being able to use a mental health days as a reasonable accommodation. I think that if, there couldn't be an unlimited amount of days, but if a physician could, write for a reasonable accommodation for a limited number of mental health days, I think that could be helpful.
Great, thank you. We have another question from the audience. This is for anyone that'd like to respond. What questions are too personal for people such as your friends, peers, or teachers to ask you about your disability? How do you handle curiosity about your disability? Robin, go ahead.
So I remember when I first got to college, I struggled a lot with people asking questions because they're always looking for proof. They're always looking for, oh, well, you say you've had surgeries. Can we see the scars? No, you cannot. That's way too personal. But I think that a lot of people, it is curiosity getting the better of people, and people are inherently curious. So I understand when they ask questions like, oh, well, how did this happen? Or is it difficult with all the doctors and stuff? So I do understand that sometimes it's just curiosity, but I think that understanding that we're human, we don't want to talk to you about our medical history when we're just making friends. I would rather talk to you about my interests and the things that aren't inherently related to, I am so much more than just my disability. And I wish people, asked other questions first and got to know us first instead of just jumping the gun and asking about the disability.
Thank you, Robin. We have time for one more. Go ahead, Mr. Groton.
I was going to say that for me, it depends on how well I know the person, but in general, questions about my own individual sexuality are off limits. I can remember several different situations where people who were complete, I hadn't met them yet, would ask me if I could do this, that, or the other. And it was not in a flirtatious manner. But I did have several different retorts to those inquiries that I won't get into at this point. But just to say that, what I can do and how I can do it in terms of my own individual human sexuality is nobody else besides my wife's business. And
thank you. Yeah, thank you. We do have time for one more response if anyone else would like to share. How do you handle curiosity that people have or want to ask about your disability? Tommy?
My disability is very complex, so there's multiple levels to it. So like, I don't like to get very deep into it with people who I don't know or people who I've just met. Like, it's really just, business between myself, like my doctors. It's like, I'm doing what I gotta do, but like, that's not what I wanna, entertain, like talking to people, getting to know them, because it's like, I'm so much more than that. Like, it puts limitations on me, but it doesn't limit what I can do. And so that's not, like, learning about my disability is not a basis for a friendship.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for all of you for being so vulnerable. I think, especially in this space, you don't know who's watching, and I just appreciate your vulnerability and willing to share. It's really powerful, and I know you're impacting a lot of people that you may not even know. And so I just appreciate that vulnerability tonight. If you do have any other questions, if any of the panelists do, we do encourage you to send an email to Professor Booker, and you can contact him through his email address at booker_k@mitchell.edu. If you do have any other questions, or if you'd like to connect with any of the panelists tonight, you can email him. And now we'd like to welcome Antea Lee, the Accessibility Coordinator for Mitchell College, and she will share a brief recap of some of the highlights from our discussion this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for introducing me. I'm very happy to be here. As I've been sitting here listening this evening, I've been jotting down notes of different themes and pieces of information that reoccur. And one theme that I keep coming back to is that people are more than just their disability. Their disability is part of them, but it is not all of them. And so asking about what you can do to support them and asking them how they can contribute or how they would like to be included is always the best course of action, because when we assume things, we don't always give the benefit of being fully included to people who have differences in terms of ability or neurodiversities. And so it is our job as community members, those of us who are neurodiverse or otherwise abled or not, to have empathy and to remember that we need to be mindful of other people's experiences and that they may not be the same as we assume that they are. And to always think about how we can provide access as a forethought and not as an afterthought. So what can we do to make sure that spaces are inclusive, both physically and otherwise? So are we looking at how spaces are set up? What type of furniture is available? How are materials being provided so that individuals can access them regardless of which way is best for them? Those are all things that are important and that we need to keep at the forefront of our minds so that we can support one another regardless of who we are, where we're coming from. So I think those are the main points that sort of encompass everything that everyone shared tonight. And I would like to hand it back to Mr. Kevin Booker to close up this evening's remarks. And again, thank you for including me. It's been an honor to listen to so many of my students share their experiences and to be so vulnerable. And I appreciate being allowed to be a part of that.
Thank you so much, Principal Lindsay Thompson. Thank you so much, Antea Lee. Boy, this was a phenomenal, insightful panel discussion this evening. I just want to thank you all for joining this important event this evening. And thank you to the incredible panelists for being a part of this event. And thank you to all the staff and faculty at Mitchell College for organizing a safe space for students to watch this insightful event tonight. Remember that disabilities can be invisible, and people are more than their disability, as Mrs. Lee said. And remember, 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. That translates to about 1 billion people worldwide. And I want to thank you, Groton Public Library, for sponsoring this program this evening. I appreciate you all for tuning in to this event. And special thanks to Dr. Gladys Labus for moderating the event. Special thanks to Costella Copeland Smith for giving us a brief history of disableism and neurodiversity. And special thanks to William DeMayo for his strong efforts of bringing us all together and also sharing a few special words with us about the importance of coming together as a unified front. And to my phenomenal and amazing panelists, special thanks to Kyle Murray, woo, Reverend Hollis Cotton, Olivia Bump, woo, Tommy Simmons, woo, and also just all these incredible individuals. Principal Lindsay Thompson, Antea Lee, and let's give a round of applause to all the people who made this event and brought it together. As we work together as one, this is how we have to continue coming together as a community to make sure all voices are being heard. I really appreciate you all. You are amazing individuals. Thank you so much for all the great work you are doing outside of this call and beyond, because you live it, you breathe it on a daily basis. So if you're watching this insightful discussion, you see these individuals, please contact them, because they're not just sharing this information, they're about this. They live it, they breathe it. And next Thursday, we will have Judith Heumann who is speaking at Connecticut College at 7 p.m. And I would love to see you all there because I know it's going to be extremely insightful. And I want to end with a quote by Mr. M.K. Asante Jr. He once said, when you make an observation, you have an obligation. When you make an observation, you have an obligation. Let's make sure everyone, and I mean everyone, is being included and represented at the table. Because that's what we have to continue doing. We have to make sure everyone is being included at the table. And I would recommend that you read the book, Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability activist by Judith Heumann. So I want to thank you all again for joining this insightful discussion. It was extremely informative, and I hope that you have a great night, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.